The note was only 21 words long, but when the billionaire groom opened it at the altar, 300 wedding guests watched his perfect life collapse in real time. Your groom has 2 sons he never met. They're here today. The boys sitting in the front row weren't guests, they were the truth he'd spent 16 years running from. Their mother, the woman he'd abandoned while she was pregnant with twins, had finally let them come for answers. And in 60 seconds, he'd have to choose, marry the woman in white, walking toward him, or face the family he'd thrown away like garbage. The cathedral looked like something out of a fairy tale. White roses climbed every marble column. Chandeliers the size of dining tables cast golden light across 300 guests, dressed in silks and tailored wool. A string quartet played softly near the altar, their bows moving in perfect unison. Media drones hovered discreetly near the stained glass windows, capturing every angle for the society pages that would run in a dozen countries by morning. Matthew Frederick stood near the vestibule in a custom tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. His hair was swept back with the kind of casual perfection that required 3 stylists and 40 minutes. His cufflinks were platinum, his shoes were Italian, his smile was rehearsed, and inside his chest, his heart beat with the steady rhythm of a man who believed he had won. He was about to marry Zella Hartwell, brilliant, beautiful, politically connected, the kind of woman who looked good on magazine covers and better in boardrooms. She was poised, she was polished, she was perfect. And she had no idea who he used to be. Richard Monroe, his best man and business partner, clapped him on the shoulder. "You ready for this?" Matthew nodded, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Good, because you're about to lock down the future, my friend. Zella's father just signed off on the Singapore expansion. This marriage seals everything." Matthew's jaw tightened. He'd never liked that phrase. This marriage seals everything. It made love sound like a contract. But then again, wasn't that what this was? A merger? A strategic alliance. 2 empires becoming one. He'd stopped believing in love a long time ago. The wedding coordinator, a sharp woman with a clipboard and a headset, waved at them from the cathedral entrance. "Gentlemen, it's time. Mr. Frederick, your parents' seats are just ahead. Take your position at the altar." Matthew nodded and walked toward the front of the cathedral, his shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. Guests turned to watch him, murmuring their admiration. He passed row after row of familiar faces, investors, CEOs, distant cousins he barely remembered, Zella's endless network of influential friends. Then his eyes fell on the front row. 2 seats, draped in ivory, velvet, were reserved for his parents. They were running late, as usual. His mother had texted 20 minutes ago, "Traffic, we'll be there. Don't start without us." But someone had left something on one of the seats. A folded piece of paper. Matthew paused. It sat there like a wrong note, in a symphony small, out of place, impossible to ignore. He glanced around, but no one seemed to be watching him. He reached down and picked it up, expecting a blessing from a guest, or maybe a handwritten prayer from his mother. He unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, the kind of scrawl someone writes when their hands won't stop trembling. "Your groom has 2 sons he never met. They're here today." The words punched through him like a blade. His vision blurred, his breath caught. The cathedral seemed to tilt beneath his feet. No, this couldn't be real. He read the note again, then again. 21 words, no signature, no explanation, just a truth he'd spent 16 years outrunning. His head snapped up. And that's when he saw them. Front row, left side, 2 boys sitting stiffly side by side, hands folded in their laps, shoulders squared like soldiers preparing for battle. Twins, 16, maybe 17 years old. Dark hair, combed neatly, but still rebellious at the edges. Storm gray eyes that reflected the chandelier light. Strong jaws, dimpled chins. His jaw, his eyes, his face, staring back at him twice. Matthew's pulse became thunder in his ears. One of the boys, the one on the left, broader in the shoulders, met his gaze and didn't look away. There was no anger in his expression. No pleading, just a quiet, devastating certainty. "I know who you are, and you know who I am." The other boy, slighter and quieter, stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as if it took everything in him not to crumble. Matthew's knees nearly buckled. And then, God help him, he saw her. 3 rows back, partially hidden behind an older woman in a lavender hat. Alana Benner. The woman he'd loved. The woman he'd abandoned. The woman he'd spent 16 years trying to forget, but never stopped remembering. She looked older now, thinner. Her hair was shorter, streaked with a few strands of silver she hadn't bothered to hide. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing like the flowing skirts she used to love. But her eyes, those dark, steady eyes, were exactly the same. And they were looking at him, the way a woman looks at a ghost. The organ swelled. Guests rose to their feet, the rustle of fabric filling the cathedral like a wave. The doors at the back of the cathedral opened. Zella appeared, framed in golden light, her veil cascading behind her like a waterfall. She was radiant, flawless. She smiled at him from across the length of the aisle, confident that in 60 seconds, she would become Mrs. Matthew Frederick. But Matthew wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the life he'd never lived. At the boys who had his face. At the woman who had raised them alone. At the truth that had finally come for him. His hands shook. The note crumpled in his fist. The quartet played. Zella began her slow, elegant walk down the aisle. And Matthew Frederick, billionaire, inventor, builder of cities, felt the ground crack open beneath him. Because for the first time in 16 years, he couldn't run. You've seen it, haven't you? That moment when the past catches up. When the life you built on silence and secrets finally demands to be heard. Some of us have been Alana, the one who stayed strong when someone walked away. Some of us have been those boys wondering if we ever mattered to the person who should have loved us most. If this story is stirring something in you, stay with me. Subscribe, so you don't miss what happens when a man who had everything realizes he lost the only things that mattered. Because what comes next? It changes everything. The memory hit Matthew like a fist to the chest. 16 years ago, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't the kind of man who stood in cathedrals surrounded by 300 guests and media drones. He was a 26-year-old engineer with calloused hands, coffee-stained blueprints, and an ambition so fierce it burned through everything in its path, including the one person who'd loved him when he had nothing. Their apartment had been on the third floor of a building that should have been condemned. Peeling paint, a bathroom faucet that dripped all night no matter how hard you tightened it. A radiator that clanged like someone beating it with a wrench. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person, let alone two, and the bedroom window overlooked a brick wall so close you could touch it if you leaned out far enough. But Alana had made it beautiful. She'd hung sheer curtains that caught the morning light. She'd filled mason jars with wildflowers from the bodega down the street. She'd tucked fairy lights along the ceiling so that at night, the whole apartment glowed soft and golden. She had a way of taking broken things and making them feel whole. Matthew had loved her for that. Or maybe he just needed her for that. He'd never been sure of the difference. She'd been a graphic designer back then, freelancing from their couch while he spread prototype designs across every available surface, the coffee table, the kitchen counter, even the floor. She never complained. She just moved her laptop to make room for his dreams and smiled like his success was hers too. "You're going to change the world," she told him once, tucking her legs beneath her as she watched him sketch. "Not if I can't get funding," he'd muttered, erasing a line for the 5th time. "You will. Someone's going to see what I see." He'd looked up at her, then really looked, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, her eyes warm and steady, her belief in him so complete it almost scared him. "And what do you see?" he'd asked. She'd smiled, "Someone worth believing in." That had been 3 months before everything fell apart. The day it happened, Alana had left the apartment early. Matthew hadn't thought much of it. She'd said something about an errand, and he'd been too deep in calculations to ask questions. He'd been chasing a breakthrough for weeks, trying to crack the energy efficiency problem that had stumped every engineer before him. If he could solve it, he could pitch it. If he could pitch it, someone might finally invest. When she came home that afternoon, her hands were shaking. She'd stood in the doorway of their apartment, holding a white paper bag from the pharmacy and a folded piece of paper she kept pressed against her chest like it might fly away. "Matthew," she'd said softly, "I need to talk to you." He hadn't looked up. "Can it wait? I'm right in the middle of something. It's important." "So is this." He gestured at the blueprints scattered across the table. "Richard's supposed to call me tonight, if I can show him this works." "Matthew, please." Something in her voice had made him pause. He'd turned, finally seeing the pallor in her face, the way her fingers trembled as they gripped that folded paper. "What's wrong?" he'd asked, but before she could answer, his phone had rung. Richard Monroe, the investor who'd been stringing him along for months with maybes and we'll sees. Matthew had grabbed the phone so fast he'd knocked over his coffee. "Richard, tell me you have good news." Alana had stood there, frozen, as Matthew paced the tiny apartment, his voice rising with excitement. Yes, I can do that." "Singapore? When? 3 hours?" "Richard, yes. I understand. I'll be there." He'd hung up and let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a shout. "He's funding it, Alana. He's funding the entire project. He wants me in Singapore tonight to meet the development team. This is it. This is everything." He'd turned to her, grinning, breathless, and that's when he'd seen her face. She looked like someone had reached inside her chest and pulled out her heart. "Matthew," she whispered, "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. For a moment, he'd just stared at her. Then he'd shaken his head, as if he could shake the words loose and make them disappear. "You're... what?" "I'm pregnant." Her voice was steadier now, but her hands were still shaking. She held out the folded paper, the ultrasound image. "Twins. 2 babies. I found out this morning." He'd looked at the image. 2 tiny shapes, barely recognizable as human. 2 futures he hadn't planned for. 2 anchors that would drag him down just as he was finally about to fly. "Alana, he'd stopped, started again. "I can't. Not now. Not when everything's finally happening." She'd finished for him. Her eyes had filled with tears, but her voice hadn't broken. I know this is terrible timing, but Matthew, this is happening. We're having babies, 2 of them, and I need you to. I'm leaving for Singapore in 3 hours." The words had come out flat, cold, final. She'd stared at him like he'd slapped her. "You're leaving." "I have to. Richard's already booked the flight. The team's waiting. If I don't go now, I lose everything. And if you do go," she'd said quietly, "you lose us." He'd looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd answered that phone call. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't pleading. She was just waiting. Waiting to see who he would choose to be. And he'd chosen ambition. "I'll send money," he'd said, already moving toward the bedroom to pack. "I'll figure something out." "But, Alana, I can't slow down. Not now. Not when I'm this close. You don't even know what you're walking away from." Her voice had been so quiet, he'd almost missed it. He'd paused in the doorway, his duffel bag half packed, and for a moment, just one moment, he'd almost turned around, almost asked her to say it again. Almost let himself imagine a different version of this day where he stayed. But the phone in his pocket had buzzed with flight details, and the moment passed. He'd left 20 minutes later. A taxi to the airport. A plane that took him so far from that tiny apartment, he convinced himself it had never existed. And Alana had stood in the doorway, holding those ultrasound images, watching the man she loved disappear into a future that didn't include her. He never called. He never asked if she was okay. He never wondered if she'd kept the babies or what their names were or whether they had his eyes. He told himself it was because he was busy, because Singapore was demanding, because building an empire required sacrifice. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. He'd been relieved. Relieved not to be tied down. Relieved not to have to choose between fatherhood and fortune. Relieved that she'd made it easy by not chasing him. And Alana, strong, beautiful, broken-hearted Alana, had vanished from his world completely, changed her number, moved apartments, disappeared so thoroughly that when he'd tried to look her up years later, out of guilt or curiosity, or some twisted version of nostalgia, he'd found nothing. No social media profiles, no forwarding address, no trace. She'd erased herself from his life as completely as he'd erased her from his conscience. And now, 16 years later, she was sitting 3 rows back from his wedding altar, with their sons in the front row, waiting for the reckoning he'd always known was coming. He never asked. She never chased him. And the life they might have built together had grown up without him. That kind of pain being left when you needed someone most, it doesn't just disappear, does it? Some of you know exactly what Alana felt in that moment. Maybe you've been the one holding an ultrasound, a diagnosis, a piece of news that should have been shared, and the person who should have stayed chose to walk away instead. If this story is touching something deep in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to be stronger than you thought possible because someone else chose not to stay? Your story matters, and I promise you, Alana's strength is just beginning to show. Alana disappeared the way women do when they need to survive quietly, completely, without leaving a forwarding address. She moved 3 towns over to a place called Riverside, a small city where nobody knew her name and nobody asked questions. She found a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where the floors creaked and the windows rattled when trucks passed by. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and more importantly, it was nowhere Matthew would ever think to look. She changed her phone number, deleted her social media accounts, stopped checking her email. She became a ghost in her own life, erasing every digital footprint that might lead him back to her, not because she wanted him to find her, but because she was terrified he might try, and she wouldn't be strong enough to say no. The twins came early, 6 weeks early. She'd been folding laundry when the first contraction hit, sharp and vicious, like someone had reached inside her and twisted. She'd barely made it to the hospital before her water broke. The delivery room had been chaos, monitors beeping, nurses shouting instructions, a doctor she'd never met telling her to push harder, don't stop. Marion came first, 4 pounds, 2 ounces, barely the size of a bag of sugar. He came out screaming, his tiny fists clenched like he was already ready to fight the world. Raf came 3 minutes later, 3 pounds, 15 ounces, silent, too silent. They'd whisked him away before Alana could even see his face, and for one terrible moment, she thought she'd lost him. But then she heard a soft, whimpering cry from across the room, weak but alive. Both boys spent the first 2 weeks of their lives in the NICU, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed through the night. Alana lived in that hospital. She slept in a chair beside their incubators, her hand pressed against the plastic, willing them to keep breathing. She pumped milk every 3 hours, even when her body screamed for rest. She talked to them constantly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to be okay. She didn't know if she believed it, but she said it anyway. Carol found her on the 10th night. Carol was her mother's older sister, a woman with silver hair, sturdy hands, and a no-nonsense way of loving people that didn't require permission. She'd driven 2 hours after tracking Alana down through a mutual cousin, walked into that NICU, took one look at her niece's hollow eyes and trembling hands, and said, "You're coming home with me tonight." Alana had shaken her head. "I can't leave them. The nurses will call if anything changes. You need to sleep in a bed. You need to eat something that isn't vending machine crackers. And you need to shower, because honey, you smell like fear and regret." Alana had laughed her first laugh in weeks and let Carol take her home. Carol became the lifeline Alana didn't know she needed. She showed up on the hardest days with casseroles and quiet company. She sat with the boys when Alana had to work double shifts at the graphic design firm that had hired her on contract. She never asked about Matthew. She never judged. She just showed up. But Alana refused everything else. She refused government assistance, even when the social worker told her she qualified. She refused offers from well-meaning neighbors who wanted to pass down baby clothes. She refused every olive branch extended by people who looked at her like she was something fragile and pitiable. "I don't need charity," she'd said once, her voice sharp enough to cut. "I need to do this myself." Because accepting help meant admitting she couldn't handle it alone. And admitting she couldn't handle it alone meant admitting Matthew had been right to leave. So she worked, she saved, she survived. The boys grew. Marion was loud from the beginning, the kind of child who demanded attention and got it. He learned to walk at 10 months and immediately started climbing everything. He talked early, questioned everything, and never met a rule he didn't want to challenge. He was fire and noise and stubborn determination. Raf was different, quieter, watchful. He didn't speak until he was almost 2, and even then, he chose his words carefully, like each one cost something. He loved drawing, filling notebooks with sketches of birds and buildings and faces he'd seen only once. He noticed things other people missed, the way light hit a window, the way his mother's smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. They were opposites in almost every way, but they were inseparable. Their childhood was modest. There were no birthday parties at trampoline parks or family vacations to the beach, but there were Saturday morning pancakes made from scratch. There were bedtime stories Alana invented when they couldn't afford new books. There were afternoons spent kicking a soccer ball in the park, the three of them laughing so hard, they forgot, for a moment, that there was a hole in their family where a father should have been. But the absence was always there, a shadow, a question the boys didn't know how to ask. "Why don't we have a dad?" Marion had asked once when he was 7, standing in the kitchen while Alana packed their school lunches. She'd frozen, the knife hovering over the peanut butter jar. "You do have a dad," she'd said carefully. "He just isn't here." "Why not?" "Because sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they love. And sometimes those choices can't be undone." Marion had frowned, unsatisfied. But he hadn't pushed. Raph had just watched her from the table, his gray eyes, Matthew's eyes, seeing straight through her. Alana never dated, never even tried. The few men who showed interest were met with polite distance. She told herself it was because she didn't have time, because the boys needed her full attention. But the truth was simpler. She was terrified. Terrified that if she let someone in, Matthew would somehow find out. Terrified that he'd come back and demand rights to the sons he'd abandoned. Terrified that the fragile, hard-won life she'd built would shatter the moment he reappeared. So she kept her distance from everyone, even from herself. The truth came out 3 weeks before Matthew's wedding. Marion had been assigned a school project on technological pioneers. He'd picked smart city innovations, thinking it would be easy. He'd done the research, found the biggest names in the industry, and started compiling his report. And that's when he saw the photo. Matthew Frederick, CEO, Billionaire, inventor of integrated urban systems. Marion had stared at the screen for a full minute, his heart pounding in his chest. The man in the photo had his face, his eyes, his jawline. Even the way he stood shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, was the same way Marion stood when he was trying to look confident. He'd called Raph over. "Look at this." Raph had gone pale. Who is that?" "Matthew Frederick, some tech CEO. But Raph, look at him." They'd spent the next hour digging, finding articles, interviews, pictures from a dozen different angles, and with every new image, the resemblance became undeniable. That night, they'd confronted their mother. Alana had been in the kitchen, washing dishes, when they walked in with Marion's laptop open. "Mom," Marion had said, his voice shaking. "Who is this?" She'd turned, seen the screen, and every ounce of color had drained from her face. "Where did you find that?" "School project. Mom, he looks exactly like us. Who is he?" For a long moment, she'd just stood there, soap dripping from her hands, her entire body trembling. Then she'd sat down at the kitchen table, put her face in her hands, and told them everything. The apartment, the ultrasound, the phone call, the taxi pulling away. The 16 years she'd spent trying to protect them from the truth that their father had chosen his future over theirs. Marion had been furious. "He just left? He didn't even know about us and he just left?" "He didn't let me tell him," Alana had whispered. "He didn't want to hear it." Raph had been silent for a long time. Then, in his quiet, careful way, he'd asked, "Does he know we exist now?" "No, don't you think he should?" Alana had looked at her sons, her brave, beautiful, fatherless sons, and felt her heart crack open all over again. "I don't know," she'd said honestly. "I don't know what he deserves." But Marion had already made up his mind. "We're going to tell him." And 3 weeks later, they bought bus tickets to a wedding they weren't invited to, carrying the truth their father had spent 16 years running from. Alana raised those boys with a kind of strength that doesn't make headlines. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up every single day, even when you're exhausted, even when you're scared, even when the world feels too heavy. If you've ever had to be both mother and father, if you've ever worked 2 jobs and still made pancakes on Saturday mornings, if you've ever loved someone so fiercely you rebuilt your entire life to protect them, then you understand what Alana gave those boys. Hit that like button if you believe that kind of strength deserves to be honored, because what happens next? Those boys are about to use the courage she gave them to demand answers from the man who walked away. The research started the night of the confrontation and didn't stop for 3 weeks. Marion and Raf sat side by side on the worn couch in their living room, laptop balanced between them, diving deeper and deeper into the life of the man who'd given them half their DNA and none of his time. Matthew Frederick, 41, net worth estimated at $2.3 billion, founder and CEO of Frederick Technologies, a company that had revolutionized urban planning with integrated smart city systems. His innovations were in airports across 6 continents. His face had been on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. There were interviews where he talked about perseverance, TED Talks about vision, keynote speeches about never giving up on your dreams. Marion had laughed bitterly at that one. Never give up on your dreams, just give up on your kids. They found photos of him at galas in tailored tuxedos, shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers, videos of him cutting ribbons at building openings, his smile wide and confident. Articles detailing his luxury penthouses in Singapore, New York, and London. He had everything. Private jets, award ceremonies, a life so polished it looked like it had been designed by a team of publicists. And then there was the engagement announcement. Matthew Frederick and Zella Hartwell, power couple. Match made in boardroom heaven. Wedding planned for early autumn at the Cathedral of St. Augustine, with a guest list that read like a who's who of tech moguls and political elites. Raf had stared at the photo of Matthew and Zella, her hand on his chest, both of them smiling like people who'd never known loss, and said quietly, "He got everything, except us." Marion's jaw had tightened. "He didn't get everything. He threw us away. That's not the same thing, isn't it?" The hurt grew in them like something living. Not loud, not explosive, just a steady, aching presence that sat in their chests and wouldn't leave. They watched interviews where Matthew talked about his journey from struggling engineer to billionaire visionary. He never once mentioned their mother. Never mentioned that he'd walked away from something that mattered. He told his story like it was a straight line from poverty to success, with no detours, no regrets, no consequences. "Does he even think about us?" Raf asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper. Marion didn't answer, because he didn't know, and not knowing was worse than any answer. It was Marion who found the wedding details. A society article in a glossy online magazine, complete with photos of the cathedral, the designer dress, the exclusive guest list. The wedding was set for October 14th, 3 weeks away. The article gushed about the venue, the flowers imported from Ecuador, the champagne that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week. Marion read the whole thing twice, his heart pounding harder with each sentence. Then he turned to his brother. "We're going." Raf looked up from his sketchbook, pencil frozen mid-stroke. "Going where?" "To the wedding, Marion. He needs to know we exist. He needs to see us. He can't just pretend we never happened." "What are we supposed to do? Walk up to him in front of everyone and say, 'Hi, Dad, remember that woman you abandoned 16 years ago? Surprise, you have twins?'" "Yes," Marion said simply. "That's exactly what we do." Raf set his sketchbook aside, his gray eyes, their father's eyes, searching his brother's face. "Mom will lose her mind. Mom's been protecting us from the truth our whole lives. Maybe it's time we stopped letting her. This isn't about protecting us. It's about protecting herself. You saw how she looked when we found out. She's terrified of him. Then maybe she needs to face him too." Raf was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What if he doesn't care? What if we show up and he just doesn't want us?" Marion's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "Then at least we'll know. We'll stop wondering. We'll stop hoping for something that was never going to happen." Raf nodded slowly. "Okay, we go." They planned it carefully. Bus tickets from Riverside to the Cathedral City cost $47 each. They'd been saving their allowance for months. Raf wanted a new drawing tablet. Marion wanted new cleats, but this was more important. They bought the tickets online using a prepaid card. They packed small backpacks with a change of clothes, snacks, and printouts of the cathedral address. They told their mother they were staying overnight at a friend's house for a study session. Alana had believed them, or maybe she just wanted to believe them. They left before dawn on October 14th, walking to the bus station in the dark, neither of them speaking much. The enormity of what they were doing sat between them like a third passenger. The bus ride took 4 hours. Marion stared out the window the whole time, his jaw set, his hands clenched in his lap. Raf sketched in his notebook, nervous, jagged lines that didn't look like anything. They arrived at the cathedral 2 hours before the ceremony, sat on the steps, watched as white vans pulled up with flowers, as staff hurried in and out, as photographers tested their equipment. Marion pulled out the folded note he'd written the night before. "Your groom has 2 sons he never met. They're here today. You really going to leave that?" Raph asked. "He needs to know before he sees us, otherwise he'll think we're just random kids." "We are random kids. To him. Not after today." When the cathedral doors opened for guests, they slipped inside and took their seats in the front row. 2 boys in button-down shirts and dark pants, trying to look like they belonged. No one questioned them. No one asked who they were. They just sat there, breathing carefully, waiting. Back in Riverside, Alana came home from a morning shift at the design firm to find an empty house. She called Marion's phone. No answer. She called Raph's. Nothing. Then she found the note on the kitchen counter. "Mom, we went to find him. Don't be mad. We had to. M&R." The world tilted beneath her feet. She called Carol, her voice breaking. "They went to Matthew's wedding. Carol, they went to find him. Oh, honey. I have to stop them. I have to." "Alana." Carol's voice was firm, gentle. "They're 16. They're not babies anymore. They need answers. And maybe you do too." "I don't want answers. I want them safe." "Safe from what? The truth? You can't protect them from this forever. He'll break their hearts. Maybe. Or maybe he'll surprise you. But either way, they deserve to know." Alana stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face, and then she grabbed her keys. She drove 4 hours straight, barely stopping, her hands gripping the wheel so hard they ached. She didn't know what she'd do when she got there. She didn't know if she'd stop them or stand beside them. She just knew she couldn't let them face Matthew alone. She arrived at the cathedral with 20 minutes to spare. The parking lot was full of luxury cars. The entrance was draped in white roses. Everything looked like a dream. Or a nightmare. She walked inside, her heart hammering in her chest, and scanned the rows of guests. And then she saw them. Front row, left side, Marion sitting tall, shoulders back, trying to look brave. Raph beside him, quieter, his hands folded in his lap like he was praying. Her sons. Her brave, reckless, beautiful sons. She slipped into a seat 3 rows back, hidden partially by an older woman in a lavender hat. She didn't call out to them. She didn't make a scene. She just sat there, breathing carefully, watching the backs of their heads. And then Matthew appeared near the altar, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect life. He paused near the front row, reached down, picked up a folded piece of paper. Alana's breath caught. She watched his face change as he read the note. Watched the color drain from his skin. Watched his eyes lift and land on her sons. And in that moment, that terrible, inevitable moment, 16 years of running finally came to an end. Matthew Frederick was about to meet the boys he'd never known. And nothing would ever be the same. The organ swelled to its full crescendo. 300 guests rose to their feet in a rustling wave of silk and wool. Every eye turned toward the back of the cathedral, where Zella Hartwell stood, framed in golden light, her veil cascading behind her like water, her bouquet of white peonies held perfectly at her waist. She was radiant, flawless, every inch the bride who'd planned this day, down to the second. She took her first step down the aisle, her heels clicking softly against marble. Then another. Her father walked beside her, beaming with the pride of a man watching his daughter marry into even more power than she already had. But Matthew wasn't watching her. He stood frozen at the altar, the crumpled note still clenched in his fist, his eyes locked on the 2 boys in the front row, who looked exactly like him. Richard Monroe leaned in close, his voice low and urgent. "Matt, what's wrong?" Matthew didn't answer. He couldn't speak. His throat had closed. His entire body had gone cold. Zella reached the halfway point of the aisle. Her smile was wide, confident. She had no idea the ground was about to open beneath her. Matthew turned to Richard and pressed the note into his hand. "Read this." Richard unfolded it, his eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. His face went pale. "Matthew, what is this?" "The truth. You can't." "I have to." And before Richard could say another word, before anyone could stop him, Matthew stepped away from the altar. The gasp that rippled through the cathedral was immediate and visceral. Guests froze mid-breath. The string quartet faltered, their bows stuttering to silence. Even the camera drones seemed to hesitate, hovering uncertainly in the air. Zella stopped walking. Her smile flickered. Confusion crossed her face. Then, something sharper panic. "Matthew?" she called out, her voice echoing in the sudden quiet. But Matthew wasn't looking at her. He was walking down the side aisle, toward the vestibule, his stride purposeful, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. He reached the archway, where Alana stood half-hidden behind a stone pillar. She'd moved from her seat the moment he'd picked up the note, instinct pulling her closer to her sons. She stood now, with her hands pressed flat against the cold stone, her face pale, her eyes wide. The twins had turned in their seats. Marion was on his feet. Raph sat rigid, gripping the edge of the pew like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Matthew stopped 3 feet away from them, close enough to see every detail, the shape of Marion's jaw, the gray of Raph's eyes, the way they both breathed carefully, like they were afraid the moment might shatter. His voice came out rough, broken. "Tell me they aren't mine." Alana lifted her chin. 16 years of silence. 16 years of survival. 16 years of raising these boys alone. All of it crystallized in the steel of her gaze. "I tried to tell you," she said, her voice calm but cutting. 16 years ago. You chose not to listen. Alana. No. She stepped forward, placing herself between Matthew and the twins. "You don't get to ask me for reassurance. You don't get to pretend you didn't know this was possible. You left, you ran, you never looked back." Marion moved to stand beside his mother, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. "You're our father." Raph stood too, quieter but no less certain. "We're your sons." The words hung in the cathedral air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Matthew's knees nearly buckled. He looked at Marion, fierce, protective, standing like a wall between Matthew and his mother. Then at Raph, quieter, but watching everything, seeing through every defense Matthew had ever built. "I didn't know," Matthew whispered. "I swear to God, I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Alana shot back. "I was holding the ultrasound photos in my hand when you walked out the door. But you were too busy chasing your future to notice mine was falling apart." A murmur rippled through the guests who'd moved closer, straining to hear. Camera operators scrambled to capture every angle. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a reckoning. And then, Zella's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "What the hell is this?" She stood in the center of the aisle, her veil thrown back, her bouquet clutched so tightly the stems were bending. Her father was beside her, red-faced and furious. The officiant hovered uncertainly near the altar. Zella marched toward the vestibule, her heels striking marble like gunfire. "Matthew, who are these people?" Matthew turned to face her. For 16 years, he'd been a man who knew how to perform, how to charm investors, how to command boardrooms, how to smile for cameras and make people believe he had it all figured out. But standing there, with the ghost of his past staring him down, and the life he'd built crumbling around him, he couldn't perform anymore. "My sons," he said simply. The words landed like a bomb. Zella's face went white, then red, then something beyond rage. "You're... what?" "I have 2 sons. I didn't know about them, but they're here, and they're mine." "This is insane." Zella looked at Alana, at the twins, then back at Matthew. "You're telling me you have children you never mentioned? That you hid from me?" "I didn't hide them. I didn't know they existed." "That's even worse." Her voice cracked, rising to something shrill and desperate. "You walked away from a pregnant woman and never looked back? What kind of man?" "The kind who was selfish and stupid and wrong," Matthew interrupted, his voice raw. "The kind who spent 16 years building an empire and convincing himself it was enough. The kind who's standing here right now, realizing nothing he built matters if the people who should have mattered most are strangers." The cathedral had gone dead silent. 300 people holding their breath. Zella's chest heaved. Tears streaked her perfectly applied makeup. "So what are you saying? You're going to walk away from our wedding? From us? From everything we planned?" Matthew looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful, brilliant, everything he thought he wanted. But standing there in front of his sons, he finally understood what he'd been running from all these years. The fear of not being enough. He reached up and slipped the platinum band off his ring finger, held it out to her. I can't marry you today, Zella. Her breath hitched. You're serious? I can't stand in front of all these people and make promises about building a future when I abandoned the one I should have fought for. His voice broke. I'm sorry. You deserve better than this. Better than me. Zella stared at the ring in his outstretched hand. For a moment, her face crumpled real hurt beneath the anger. Then she straightened, snatched the ring from his palm, and turned on her heel. This is going to destroy you, she said coldly. Your image, your company, everything. Then let it. She walked back down the aisle without another word, her father trailing behind her, barking orders at staff to clear the venue. Guests erupted into frantic whispers. Camera operators scrambled for exits. Someone's phone rang. A woman near the front row started crying. Chaos descended. But Matthew didn't move. He turned back to the vestibule, to Alana and the twins who stood frozen, watching him choose them for the first time in their lives. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise. I know I can't fix 16 years in one moment, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Marion's jaw was set, his arms crossed. How do we know you won't disappear again the second this gets hard? You don't, Matthew admitted, but I'm asking for a chance to prove it. Alana's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She looked at him the way someone looks at a ghost they thought they'd buried. 1 hour, she said finally. You get 1 hour to sit with us. To talk. To try. That's it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was a beginning. Matthew nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Outside, the media crews were already uploading footage. Headlines were being written. The internet was catching fire. By nightfall, the world would know the story of the billionaire who walked away from his wedding for the sons he never knew he had. But inside the cathedral, as guests filed out in scandalized whispers and staff began dismantling white roses, 4 people stood in the vestibule facing the hardest truth any of them had ever known. That family wasn't built on perfection. It was built on the courage to face the wreckage. And try again. 300 guests watched a billionaire choose his sons over his empire. And I wonder what would you have done in that moment? If you'd been Matthew, would you have had the courage to walk away from everything you'd built? If you'd been Alana, could you have opened that door even a crack after 16 years of pain? Share this story with someone who believes people can change. Because what happens next shows us that the hardest battles aren't fought in boardrooms. They're fought in the quiet moments, when we decide whether to give someone a second chance they don't deserve, but might actually earn. They stood on the cathedral steps while chaos erupted around them. Media vans lined the street, reporters shouting questions that nobody answered. Wedding guests scattered to their cars, phones pressed to their ears, spreading the scandal faster than any headline could. Inside, staff dismantled white roses and folded chairs, erasing the wedding that never was. But Matthew didn't see any of it. He saw only the 2 boys standing 3 feet away from him, their faces mirrors of his own, their eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. Not anger. Not hope. Something harder and more honest than either. Marion spoke first, his voice steady but sharp as a blade. You don't get to vanish again. The words hit Matthew like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I won't. I promise. Don't promise, Marion interrupted. Promises don't mean anything. Not from you. Marion, Alana said softly, but her son shook his head. No, Mom. He needs to hear this. Marion stepped forward, his jaw set. You missed 16 years. You weren't there when we were born early and spent weeks in the hospital. You weren't there for first steps or first words or first days of school. You weren't there when Mom worked 2 jobs so we could eat. You weren't there when kids asked where our dad was and we had to pretend it didn't hurt that we didn't know. Each sentence landed like a stone. Matthew felt his throat close, his eyes burn. Raph spoke next, quieter but no less devastating. Then prove it. Be here. I will, Matthew said, his voice cracking. I know I don't deserve. You're right. You don't. Marion's eyes were wet now, but his voice didn't waver. But we're here anyway. Because we needed to know if the man who has everything ever thought about the 2 people he threw away. Matthew's knees felt weak. He wanted to reach for them, to pull them close, To somehow compress 16 years of absence into one moment of connection. But he knew he had no right. "I thought about your mother every day," he said, the words raw and unpolished. "Every single day for 16 years. I wondered where she was. What happened to her? If she hated me, if she was okay. And I told myself I was better off not knowing, because knowing would mean facing what I'd done. I was a coward. I still am. But I'm here now. And I'm begging for a chance to start fixing what I broke." Alana had been silent through all of it, standing slightly behind her sons like a guardian watching for danger. Now she stepped forward, her arms crossed over her chest, her face unreadable. "1 hour," she said. "That's all you get. 1 hour to sit with us, to answer their questions, to try." She paused, her dark eyes searching his face. "After that, we walk away, and you don't follow us unless we decide we want you to." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even kindness. It was a door cracked open just enough to see through, but not enough to walk through. Matthew nodded, not trusting his voice. Alana turned to the twins. "Is that okay with you?" Marion hesitated, then nodded. Raph did the same. "There's a cafe 2 blocks from here," Alana said. "Quiet. Off the main street. We'll meet you there in 10 minutes. She walked away without waiting for his answer, the twins following. Matthew watched them disappear around the corner, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. Richard appeared beside him, still holding the crumpled note. "You sure about this?" "No," Matthew said honestly, "but I have to try." The cafe was exactly as Alana described, small, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of place tourists never found. Matthew arrived first, chose a corner booth away from the windows, and ordered 4 coffees he wasn't sure anyone would drink. When Alana walked in with the twins, the tension followed them like a shadow. They slid into the booth across from him, Marion on the outside, Raph in the middle, Alana closest to the wall, a united front. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation from other tables. The hiss of the espresso machine. The clink of spoons against ceramic. Normal sounds, but nothing about this moment was normal. Marion broke the silence. "Why didn't you want us?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Matthew exhaled slowly. It wasn't about wanting. It was about being terrified. I was 26. Broke. Obsessed with proving I wasn't going to fail. And when your mother tried to tell me she was pregnant, all I heard was an anchor that would drag me down. He paused, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't touched. I convinced myself I was choosing my future, but I was really just running from responsibility, from the fear that I'd be a terrible father, that I'd fail at the one thing that actually mattered. "Did you ever think of her?" Raph asked quietly. "After you left?" Matthew looked at Alana. She was staring at the table, her jaw tight, her hands folded in her lap like she was holding herself together by force of will. "Every day," he said. "I told myself it was guilt. That I was just feeling bad about how I left. But it was more than that. She was the only person who ever believed in me when I had nothing. And I walked away from her the second I didn't need her anymore." His voice dropped. "I'm not asking you to understand that. I don't understand it myself. I just know it was the worst thing I've ever done." "You built an empire," Marion said, his voice edged with bitterness. "Made billions. Got everything you wanted." "I built a prison," Matthew corrected. "I just decorated it well enough that nobody noticed." Alana finally looked up, her eyes red but dry. "You don't get to play the victim here. You made choices. You got to live with the rewards. We lived with the consequences." "I know. You don't know." Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "You don't know what it's like to give birth alone, to watch your babies fight for every breath, to explain to 2 little boys why their father doesn't want to meet them. You built buildings, Matthew. I built lives. Don't you dare compare the two." The words cut deeper than anything Marion or Raph had said, because they were true, undeniably, devastatingly true. "You're right," Matthew said. "I can't compare. I can't make up for it, but I can show up now, if you'll let me." Marion leaned back, studying him with eyes too old for 16. "What does that even mean? Show up?" "I don't know yet," Matthew admitted. "But I want to learn who you are, what you care about, what makes you laugh, what keeps you up at night." I want to be in your lives in whatever way you'll allow. Raph spoke so softly, Matthew almost missed it. What if we don't want you there? The question hung between them like a blade. Then I'll respect that, Matthew said. But I'm asking you not to decide today. Not when everything's so raw. Give me time. Give yourselves time. And if you decide I'm not worth it, I'll step back. I promise. Alana's expression hadn't softened, but something in her eyes had shifted just slightly. This isn't forgiveness, she said. I know. And it's not a second chance. Not yet. I understand. She looked at her sons. Marion was still guarded, his arms crossed. Raph was watching Matthew with quiet intensity, like he was trying to see past the words to something deeper. Finally, Alana nodded once. But it's a start. The words were small, fragile, but they were enough. Matthew exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Outside, the world was already moving on. Headlines were being written, stock prices were shifting. His reputation was crumbling in real time. But inside that small cafe, in a corner booth with 3 people who had every reason to hate him, something impossible was beginning to happen. A door cracked open. A bridge starting to form across a canyon of pain. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was the first step toward becoming the man he should have been 16 years ago. And for the first time in his life, Matthew Frederick understood that showing up was more valuable than any empire he could ever build. The scandal broke within hours. Billionaire CEO abandons bride at altar for secret sons, screamed one headline. Matthew Frederick's wedding disaster. The family he never knew, announced another. By the time the sun set on what should have been his wedding day, Matthew's face was plastered across every major news outlet. His stock prices were in free fall, and his phone was ringing non-stop with calls he refused to answer. Richard showed up at his penthouse on the 3rd day, bypassing security with the kind of authority that came from 15 years of partnership. He found Matthew on the terrace, still in the same clothes from 2 days ago, staring at the city skyline without really seeing it. You've lost the Singapore deal, Richard said without preamble. Chen pulled out this morning, said he can't afford to be associated with this level of chaos. Matthew didn't turn around. Okay. The board wants an emergency meeting. They're talking about a vote of no confidence. Let them vote. Richard's voice sharpened. Matthew, you're not listening. You're ruining your image, your reputation, everything we built. Matthew finally turned to face him. His eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. Then let it ruin. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Matthew's voice was quiet, but firm. I spent 16 years building an empire on the bones of the family I abandoned. I'm not doing that anymore. So what? You're just going to throw it all away? For 2 kids you don't even know? They're my sons. And yes, I am. Richard stared at him like he was looking at a stranger. Maybe he was. I don't know who you are anymore. Neither do I, Matthew admitted. But I'm trying to figure it out. Richard left without another word. The door closed with a finality that felt like the end of an era. But Matthew didn't feel the loss. He felt lighter. The next morning, he texted Alana. Simple, direct, terrified. Can I see them today? Just for an hour, whatever works. The reply came 20 minutes later. Marion has soccer practice at 3. You can watch if you want. Don't expect him to talk to you. Matthew arrived at the field 15 minutes early. The high school soccer complex was modest, worn bleachers, patchy grass, a scoreboard that flickered occasionally. Nothing like the luxury boxes and VIP sections he was used to. He climbed to the middle of the bleachers and sat, feeling completely out of place in his designer jeans and cashmere sweater. Marion appeared with his team, number 14 on his jersey, and Matthew's chest tightened. The way Marion moved, aggressive, fearless, always pushing forward, reminded him of himself at that age. Hungry to prove something, unwilling to back down. Alana arrived halfway through practice and sat 3 rows below him. She didn't acknowledge him, just watched her son with the focused attention of someone who'd been showing up for 16 years. When practice ended, Marion jogged over to the bleachers, sweaty and breathing hard. He looked at Matthew, then at his mother. He's here, Marion said flatly. He asked to watch, Alana replied. I said yes. Marion nodded, grabbed his water bottle, and started walking toward the parking lot. Matthew stood, uncertain. Alana gave him a look that said, go ahead, try. "You're good," Matthew called after him. "Really good. That goal in the scrimmage?" "I know I'm good," Marion said without turning around. "I've been good for years. You just weren't here to see it." The words stung. But Matthew kept walking beside him anyway. "What position do you play?" "Striker." "You like it?" "Would I play it if I didn't?" They reached the parking lot. Marion threw his bag in Alana's car. Matthew stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound desperate or false. "Same time Thursday?" he asked quietly. Marion looked at him for a long moment, then shrugged. "If you want." It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't rejection either. With Raf, the approach had to be different. Matthew learned this when he showed up at their apartment, a modest two-bedroom above a laundromat that made his chest hurt to look at with an expensive art supply set he'd ordered overnight. Alana met him at the door, took one look at the wrapped box, and shook her head. "You can't buy your way in." "I'm not trying to." "Yes, you are. Put it back in your car." Matthew had set the box down on the landing, embarrassed, and followed her inside empty-handed. Raf was at the kitchen table, sketching in a worn notebook. He glanced up when Matthew entered, then went back to his drawing without a word. "Can I see?" Matthew asked, gesturing to the notebook. Raf hesitated, then slid it across the table. The drawings were stunning. Detailed pencil sketches of buildings, faces, landscapes. There was one of a woman who looked like Alana, younger, laughing. Another of Marion mid-kick on a soccer field. And tucked in the back, a half-finished portrait of a man Raf had clearly drawn from online photos. "Matthew, you're incredibly talented," Matthew said, his voice thick. Raf shrugged. "It's just something I do. It's more than that. You see things other people miss." "Maybe." They sat in silence for a while. Matthew didn't push, didn't try to force conversation, just sat there, present, while Raf sketched, and Alana moved around the kitchen making dinner. After 20 minutes, Raf spoke. "You want to see the rooftop? There's a good view from up there." It was the first time Raf had offered anything. Matthew stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "Yeah, I'd like that." The rooftop was cluttered with old HVAC units and pigeon droppings. But Raf was right. The view was stunning. The city stretched out in every direction, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. "I come up here when things get loud in my head," Raf said quietly. "Does it help?" "Sometimes." They stood there side by side, not talking, just existing in the same space. And somehow, it felt like more progress than any of Matthew's words had achieved. Over the next 2 weeks, Matthew showed up, again and again. He watched Marion's practices, even in the rain. He sat with Raf on the rooftop and learned to be comfortable in silence. He brought coffee for Alana, not expensive, just from the bodega she liked, and left it on the doorstep when she didn't want to talk. Slowly, impossibly, the boys began to thaw. Marion started explaining plays to him. Raf showed him new sketches without being asked. There were even moments of something close to laughter. Marion teasing Raf about his terrible taste in music. Raf firing back about Marion's inability to match his socks. And Alana watched it all. She watched Matthew cancel a board meeting to make it to Marion's game. Watched him sit through 2 hours of Raf's art documentary without checking his phone once. Watched him choose them over and over, in small ways that added up to something she'd never seen from him before. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Matthew found her on the fire escape outside their apartment. She was wrapped in a cardigan, holding a mug of tea, staring at nothing. "Can I ask you something?" he said softly. She didn't look at him. "You're going to anyway. Can I be in their lives? Consistently. Not just now while everything's fresh, but 6 months from now, a year, 10 years. Alana was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she turned to him, her eyes searching his face in the dim light. "Consistency is the only thing that will save you," she said. "They can survive without money, without grand gestures, without apologies, but they can't survive being abandoned again. So if you're going to do this, you show up. Every time, no matter what. Even when it's hard, even when they push you away, even when your company is falling apart or you meet someone new or life gets complicated." "I will," Matthew said. "I promise." "Don't promise. Just do it." She went back inside, leaving him on the fire escape with the weight of her words settling over him like a vow. For the first time in 16 years, Matthew understood what it meant to be a father. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. Again and again and again. Showing up. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But it's the hardest thing some of us ever do. Showing up when we're tired, when we're uncertain, when we don't have all the answers, but we come anyway. If you've ever been the person who showed up consistently for someone, a child, a parent, a friend who needed you, then you know what Matthew is just beginning to learn. That presence is the greatest gift we can give. If this story is reminding you of the people who showed up for you, or the people you've shown up for, leave a comment. Tell me about someone who was there when it mattered. Because those stories, they're the ones worth telling. The media explosion happened on a Tuesday. For 3 weeks, Matthew had managed to keep the story contained, just society gossip, whispered scandal, a few tabloid articles that disappeared after a news cycle. But then Zella gave an interview. She sat in a pristine living room, wearing designer grief, her makeup perfect, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. The interviewer lobbed softball questions, and Zella swung for the fences. "I had no idea he had this secret family," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "He never mentioned children, never mentioned abandoning a pregnant woman. And now, this woman comes out of nowhere, conveniently showing up at our wedding with these boys, claiming Matthew is their father. Are you saying you don't believe her? I'm saying it's very convenient timing. Matthew is worth billions. And suddenly, there's a woman with twin sons who look just like him? I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just asking the questions everyone else is thinking." The implication was clear. Alana was a gold digger. The twins were pawns. The whole thing was a con. By noon, the interview had gone viral. By evening, news vans were parked outside Alana's apartment building. By the next morning, reporters were following Marion to school. Marion tried to ignore them. He walked with his head down, earbuds in, pretending the cameras didn't exist. But when he got to his locker, someone had taped a printout of the interview to the door with a note scrawled across it. "How much is your fake dad worth?" He ripped it down, crumpled it, kept walking. In third period, 3 boys cornered him in the hallway. Tyler Morrison, the quarterback who'd always resented Marion's skill on the soccer field, led the charge. "So your mom's a gold digger, huh?" Tyler said, smirking. "That why she waited 16 years to cash in?" Marion's jaw tightened. "Shut up. What's the plan? Get the billionaire to feel guilty. Squeeze him for a few million. Disappear?" I said shut up. Your mom must be good. Takes real skill to trap a guy who didn't even know she existed. Marion's fist connected with Tyler's face before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. Tyler staggered back, blood streaming from his nose. His friends grabbed Marion, and then everyone was shouting, shoving, throwing wild punches. By the time teachers pulled them apart, Marion had a split lip, bruised knuckles, and a suspension letter being drafted in the principal's office. Alana got the call at work. She left immediately, her hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire drive to the school. When she saw Marion sitting outside the principal's office, his shirt torn, his face swollen, something inside her cracked. She'd spent 16 years protecting her sons from this exact thing, the judgment, the cruelty, the world picking them apart because of who their father was. And now, it was happening anyway. That night, after the boys were asleep, Alana sat at her kitchen table with Carol, her face buried in her hands. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I thought I could. I thought we could handle the attention, the gossip. But they're attacking Marion at school. Reporters are camping outside. People are calling me a liar and a gold digger. And you're thinking about running," Carol finished gently. Alana looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I have to protect them. That's all I've ever done, protect them. Even from their father. Especially from their father. Look what knowing him has cost them already. Alana, I should take them away. Move again. Change our names if we have to. Go back to being invisible." Carol reached across the table and took her niece's hands. "That's fear talking, not wisdom. Maybe fear is wisdom. Or maybe you're just scared that if you let Matthew in completely, you'll have to face everything you've been running from too." Before Alana could respond, there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. She knew who it was before she opened it. Matthew stood in the hallway, his face drawn, his eyes red-rimmed. He'd seen the interview, heard about the fight, spent the last 6 hours trying to figure out how to fix what he'd broken. I know you don't want to see me right now, he said before she could speak, but I need you to know I'm handling it. I've got my lawyers going after Zella for defamation. I'm releasing a statement. I'm doing everything I can to protect you and the boys from— It's not enough, Alana said, her voice hollow. I know, but I'm trying. Matthew, Marion got suspended today. He got into a fight defending me from kids, calling me a gold digger. There are reporters following us everywhere. People are saying terrible things. And it's all because you decided to acknowledge us in the most public way possible. I didn't know it would. You didn't think. You never do. She pressed her fingers to her temples. I'm taking the boys and leaving. We're going somewhere you can't find us. The color drained from Matthew's face. Alana, please, don't take them from me. I'm trying. I'm showing up. You're destroying their lives. Her voice cracked. They were safe before you. Invisible. Now, they're targets. They were also wondering who their father was, whether he ever thought about them, whether they mattered. And now they know. Congratulations. Was it worth it? Matthew's hands were shaking. Yes, because I got to know them. Because Marion trusted me enough to let me watch his games. Because Raph showed me his art. Because for 3 weeks, I got to be the father I should have been all along. And if you take them away now, I lose the only thing that's ever really mattered. That's not fair. Mom? They both turned. Raph stood in the doorway to his bedroom, wearing pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt, his hair sticking up on one side. He'd been listening. Raph, go back to bed, Alana said gently. No. He walked into the kitchen, his bare feet padding softly on the linoleum. I need to say something. Honey. He's different, Mom. Alana stared at her quiet son, the one who chose his words so carefully they always landed like truth. He shows up, Raph continued, every time. Even when it's awkward, even when Marion's angry, even when you won't look at him, he just shows up. Isn't that what you always told us mattered? That people show you who they are by whether they stay? Raph, it's more complicated than— Is it? Raph looked at Matthew, then back at his mother. I'm not saying forgive him. I'm not even saying trust him yet. But he's trying. Really trying. And if we run now, we'll never know if he meant it. Alana's chest felt like it was caving in. Marion appeared in his doorway too, arms crossed, jaw still swollen from the fight. I hate that he left, Marion said quietly. I hate that we spent 16 years without him. But Raph's right. He's here now. And maybe that's enough. For now. The kitchen fell silent. Carol slipped out quietly, leaving them alone, this fractured, imperfect family trying to figure out if broken things could be rebuilt. Alana looked at Matthew, really looked at him, and, for the first time, she let herself say the thing she'd been terrified to admit. I never stopped loving the man you were, she whispered. I just stopped believing he existed. Matthew's breath hitched. Then let me prove that he still can. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close. But it was something more fragile and more powerful, the willingness to try. Alana nodded once, tears streaming down her face. One more chance. But if you disappear again, I won't. If you hurt them, I won't. If you make me regret this, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't. The twins stood there watching their parents not together, not healed, but finally, impossibly, fighting for the same thing. A family. Broken and messy and real. But a family nonetheless. Second chances. Some people don't deserve them. But some people, the ones who show up even when it's hard, who admit their failures, who choose to become better, maybe they do. Have you ever given someone a second chance they didn't deserve but earned anyway? Or have you been the one given that chance? Comment below and tell me your story. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about deciding whether someone's changed enough to deserve a place in your future. And if Marion and Raph can find the courage to let their father try, maybe there's hope for all of us. Like this video if you believe people can change. Matthew picked them up on a Saturday morning when the sky was that particular shade of blue that promised good things. No clouds, no cameras. Just 4 people trying to figure out what family looked like when it hadn't existed 3 months ago. Where are we going? Marion asked from the back seat of Matthew's car, not the Bentley he'd sold last week, but a practical SUV that had room for soccer gear and art supplies. You'll see, Matthew said, glancing at Alana in the passenger seat. She'd agreed to come. which felt like a miracle in itself. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving the city behind until they reached a stretch of coastline Matthew had discovered years ago during a business trip. A quiet beach with smooth gray stones instead of sand, tide pools that reflected the sky, and a hiking trail that wound along the cliffs. "It's not fancy," Matthew said as they parked, "but I thought maybe we could just be, without people watching." Raph was already out of the car, staring at the water. "It's perfect." They walked the beach slowly. No agenda, no schedule. Marion picked up stones and tried skipping them across the water. Raph took photos on his phone, capturing the way light hit the tide pools. Alana walked with her arms wrapped around herself, breathing in salt air like it was medicine. Matthew stayed close but not too close, learning the rhythm of being present without overwhelming. "You know what's weird?" Marion said suddenly, launching another stone. 3 months ago, I didn't even know you existed, and now you're just here, watching my games, texting me stupid jokes, being annoying." "Annoying?" Matthew raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, like a dad." Marion's voice was light, but his eyes were serious. "It's weird, but it's not bad." Matthew's throat tightened. "I'm glad it's not bad." They kept walking, found a spot on the rocks where they could sit and watch the waves crash against the shore. Raph pulled out his sketchbook, always with him, and started drawing the horizon line. "Can I see what else you've been working on?" Matthew asked. Raph hesitated, then handed over the notebook. Matthew flipped through slowly. Portraits of Marion. Landscapes of places Raph had only seen in photographs. And near the back, a half-finished sketch of 4 people on a beach. "Is this us?" Matthew asked quietly. "I started it last night," Raph admitted. "I don't know how it ends yet." "None of us do," Alana said softly. They sat there for a long time, listening to the ocean. Marion told stories about his soccer team. Raph talked about an art program he wanted to apply for. Matthew shared embarrassing stories from his early engineering days, back when he was broke and hungry, and hadn't yet learned to confuse success with happiness. "You know what I never got to say," Matthew said, looking at Alana. "Thank you." She frowned. "For what?" "For raising 2 exceptional human beings completely alone. For giving them everything I should have been there to help provide. For teaching them to be kind and strong and honest. For never turning them against me, even though you had every right to." His voice cracked. "You did the hardest thing in the world, and you did it brilliantly. And I'm sorry I wasn't there, but I'm grateful they had you." Alana's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, toward the ocean, and nodded once. It was all she could manage. They stayed at the beach until early evening, then found a small seafood shack that served fish and chips in paper baskets. They sat at a picnic table overlooking the water, passing salt and vinegar, arguing good-naturedly about whether ketchup belonged anywhere near seafood. Marion stole fries from Raph's basket. Raph retaliated by dumping extra salt on Marion's. Alana laughed, really laughed for the first time in months, and Matthew felt something settle in his chest that he'd never felt before. Peace. Not perfection, just peace. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marion cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking at anyone, "about what to call you." Matthew's breath caught. "You don't have to call me anything, whatever you're comfortable with." "Dad," Marion interrupted. "I think I want to call you Dad." He finally looked up. His gray eyes, Matthew's eyes, meeting his father's. "You're not so bad, for a guy who missed 16 years. Matthew couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He just nodded, his vision blurring. Raph spoke next, quieter but just as certain. "We want you around, not just for now, for the long term, if that's what you want too." "It's all I want," Matthew managed to say. Alana watched this moment unfold, her sons claiming their father, her past becoming part of her present, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 16 years. Hope. "We need to talk about logistics," she said, ever practical even when emotions ran high. "Co-parenting, schedules, how this actually works when real life gets complicated." "I know," Matthew said, "and I'm ready for that conversation. All of it. I'm stepping back from the company," he continued, "appointing an interim CEO. I'll stay on the board, consult when needed, but I'm not running the day-to-day anymore. I miss 16 years. I'm not missing another day, if I can help it." Matthew. Alana started. "I'm sure. The company was supposed to be my legacy, but they are, he gestured to the twins. This is us figuring out how to be a family. That's worth more than any building I could design or contract I could sign. Marion and Raph exchanged glances. Then Marion said, "That's pretty intense." "Is it too much?" Matthew asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," Raph said. "It's kind of perfect, actually." They walked back to the car as the last light faded from the sky. Marion walked ahead with Raph, the two of them talking about summer plans. Matthew and Alana followed a few steps behind. "This doesn't fix everything," Alana said quietly. "I know. There's going to be hard days. Days when they're angry. Days when I'm angry. Days when showing up isn't enough. I know that too. But if you keep showing up anyway, I will," Matthew said firmly. "Every day. Every hard conversation. Every awkward moment. I'm here. For as long as you'll let me be." Alana looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the boy who'd left her broken in a third-floor apartment, but a man who was finally learning what mattered. "Okay," she said simply. They reached the car. Marion called shotgun. Raph rolled his eyes but climbed in back without arguing. Alana slid into the passenger seat, and Matthew took one last look at the beach before starting the engine. The drive home was quieter, comfortable. Marion fell asleep against the window. Raph sketched by the light of passing street lamps. Alana watched the road ahead, her hand resting on the armrest between seats. And Matthew drove carefully, protectively, carrying the most precious cargo he'd ever been trusted with. For the first time in 16 years, he wasn't running towards some imaginary future where success would finally feel like enough. He was walking beside the family he'd almost lost forever. Not perfect, not healed completely, but together. And that finally, impossibly, beautifully was enough. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better, something real. A family built not on perfection, but on the courage to face broken things and choose to rebuild them anyway. If this story reminded you that people can change, that second chances sometimes work, that family isn't just biology, but the choice to show up, then I'd be honored if you'd subscribe, because stories like this matter. They remind us that it's never too late to become who we should have been all along. Share this with someone who needs to hear that message. Leave a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. And remember, the best legacies aren't built in boardrooms. They're built in the quiet moments when we finally choose love over everything else. Thank you for being here with me today.